before we dive into this forbidden knowledge, I need to know something. What time is it where you are right now? And where are you watching this from? I'm asking because time and location matter more than you think when it comes to what I'm about to reveal. The vibrational frequency of your geographic location, combined with the cosmic alignment of the hour you're receiving this information, creates a unique resonance pattern that will determine how deeply this truth penetrates your consciousness. So drop your location and time in the comments, because you're not here by accident. You're here because your soul knew it was time to remember what they've been hiding from you about meditation and what's really happening inside your brain when you close your eyes and go within. You've been told meditation is just about relaxation, stress relief, maybe a little mental clarity, right? That's what the mainstream wellness industry wants you to believe. They package it up nicely, sell it as a productivity hack, a way to calm your anxiety, a tool for better sleep, and sure, meditation does all of those things. But what if I told you that's just the surface, the acceptable narrative they allow you to hear, because the real truth about what happens in your brain during meditation is so profound, so reality-shattering, that if everyone knew it, the entire structure of control and conformity that keeps humanity asleep would crumble overnight? What if I told you that when you meditate, you're not just calming your mind, you're literally rewiring the dimensional gateway system in your brain, activating ancient neural pathways that connect you to quantum fields of consciousness that exist beyond space and time, and accessing information that's been deliberately suppressed by institutions that profit from your spiritual ignorance. Because here's the secret they don't want you to know. Your brain isn't just an organ that processes thoughts and memories, it's a multidimensional antenna, a biological transceiver that can tune into frequencies of reality that most people never access in their entire lives. And meditation is the forbidden key that unlocks this capability. But the scientific establishment, the pharmaceutical industry, the religious institutions, they've all conspired, whether consciously or unconsciously, to keep you from understanding the true power of what's happening inside your skull when you enter meditative states. Let me take you back to the ancient mystery schools of Egypt, Tibet, and India, places where meditation wasn't called meditation. It was called consciousness training, reality navigation, soul awakening. The Egyptian priests who spent years in the temples of Luxor and Karnak weren't just sitting around relaxing. They were undergoing initiations that involved sustained meditative states lasting days, even weeks. And during these states, they reported traveling to other dimensions, communicating with beings of pure consciousness, accessing the Akashic Records where all knowledge of past, present, and future is stored. And here's what's fascinating. Modern neuroscience, despite its materialistic limitations, is finally catching up to what these ancient practitioners knew thousands of years ago. When researchers put experienced meditators into fMRI machines and EEG scanners, what they discovered shocked the scientific community. Though they're very careful about how they frame these findings because the implications are too radical for mainstream acceptance. They found that during deep meditation, the brain doesn't just calm down, it fundamentally reorganizes itself. Areas that normally don't communicate suddenly light up in synchronization. Brainwave patterns shift from the normal beta waves of waking consciousness down into alpha, theta, and even delta states that are usually only accessible during deep sleep or near-death experiences. And the default mode network, that part of your brain that maintains your sense of separate self and ego identity, it literally shuts down, which is why experienced meditators report states of unity consciousness where the boundaries between self and universe dissolve completely. But here's where it gets even more forbidden, even more suppressed from public knowledge. When the default mode network deactivates during meditation, something else activates, something that neuroscientists are just beginning to understand and are struggling to explain within their materialistic paradigm. The pineal gland, that tiny pine cone-shaped gland in the center of your brain that ancient traditions called the third eye, the seat of the soul, the gateway to higher dimensions, it begins to vibrate at frequencies that produce endogenous DMT, yes, dimethyltryptamine, the same molecule found in ayahuasca and other sacred plant medicines. Your brain naturally produces this during deep meditation, during birth, during death, and during profound spiritual experiences. The pineal gland contains crystalline structures, actual crystals made of calcite that respond to electromagnetic fields and can detect subtle energy patterns that your 5 physical senses can't perceive. And when you meditate consistently, especially if you're focusing on the area between your eyebrows or the crown of your head, you're stimulating this gland, decalcifying it if it's been hardened by fluoride and toxins in our water and food supply. Another convenient fact that keeps humanity's spiritual antenna blocked. And as the pineal gland activates, it produces hormones and neurotransmitters that literally alter your perception of reality, allowing you to perceive dimensions of existence that are always there, but normally filtered out by your brain's reducing valve function. The British philosopher Aldous Huxley understood this when he wrote about the brain as a reducing valve, drawing on the work of Henri Bergson. The idea is that your brain isn't actually producing consciousness, it's filtering it, reducing the infinite ocean of universal consciousness down to a tiny trickle that you can process and navigate in physical reality without being completely overwhelmed. But meditation, especially advanced meditation practices, it opens that valve, it expands your bandwidth, allowing more of that infinite consciousness to flow through you. And this is exactly what the Tibetan monks discovered through their sophisticated practices of tummo, dream yoga, and dzogchen meditation. When neuroscientist Richard Davidson studied Tibetan Buddhist monks with over 10,000 hours of meditation experience, he found their brainwave patterns were off the charts. They could generate gamma waves, the highest frequency brainwaves associated with peak performance and heightened consciousness, at levels never before recorded in scientific literature. And they could sustain these states at will, not just during meditation, but in their daily activities, which means they're essentially living in an expanded state of consciousness that most people never access even once in their entire lives. Now let's talk about what's happening in your brain at the neurochemical level during meditation, because this is where science and ancient mysticism converge in ways that are absolutely mind-blowing. When you meditate, your brain increases production of several key neurotransmitters and hormones. GABA levels rise, which calms anxiety and creates feelings of peace. Serotonin floods your system, producing states of well-being and happiness without any external drugs. Dopamine increases, but in a balanced, sustainable way, unlike the addictive spikes from social media or junk food. Endorphins release, creating natural states of euphoria. And here's the big one that they really don't want you to know about. Your brain produces more melatonin during meditation than during sleep. And melatonin isn't just a sleep hormone. It's a powerful antioxidant, and in high concentrations, it produces visionary states and profound mystical experiences. The pharmaceutical industry knows this. They know that if people realize they could produce all these beneficial neurochemicals naturally through meditation, the multi-billion-dollar antidepressant and anti-anxiety medication market would collapse. Which is why meditation is kept in the realm of alternative wellness rather than being recognized as the primary healthcare intervention it should be, and why research funding for meditation studies is a tiny fraction of what goes toward drug development. But let's go deeper. into the really forbidden territory that neuroscience is only beginning to touch. When you meditate regularly over months and years, your brain undergoes structural changes, not just functional changes, actual physical rewiring. This is called neuroplasticity, and the implications are staggering. Studies show that meditation increases gray matter density in the hippocampus, the area associated with learning, memory, and emotional regulation. It thickens the prefrontal cortex, the seat of higher-order thinking and decision-making. It strengthens the corpus callosum, the bridge between left and right brain hemispheres, allowing for greater integration of logical and intuitive thinking. And here's the kicker. It actually shrinks the amygdala, the fear center of the brain that keeps you in fight-or-flight stress responses, trapped in survival mode, unable to access higher states of consciousness. This means meditation is literally rebuilding your brain to be less fearful, less reactive, less controlled by the primitive survival mechanisms that kept our ancestors alive, but now keep modern humans trapped in anxiety, depression, and spiritual disconnection. And when you're less fearful, you're less controllable, less manipulable by fear-based propaganda, less likely to give away your power to external authorities, which is exactly why certain power structures don't want meditation to become mainstream in its true form. The ancient Hermetic teachings understood this. They taught, as above, so below, as within, so without, meaning the microcosm reflects the macrocosm. Your internal state creates your external reality. And when you change your brain through meditation, you're not just changing your personal experience, you're changing your vibrational frequency, which affects the quantum field around you, influencing what you attract, manifest, and experience in your life. Modern quantum physics is finally catching up to this ancient wisdom through the observer effect and wave function collapse theories. The Copenhagen interpretation of quantum mechanics tells us that consciousness plays a fundamental role in creating reality. Particles exist in superposition, in multiple states simultaneously, until an observer measures them, and the act of observation collapses the wave function into a single definite state, which means your consciousness, your awareness, literally affects physical reality at the quantum level. When you meditate, you're training your consciousness to become more coherent, more focused, more powerful as an observer and therefore as a creator of your reality. And this is why the ancient mystery schools taught that meditation was the foundation of all magical and manifestation practices. Now here's something truly mind-bending that they definitely don't want you connecting the dots on. When you meditate deeply, especially in theta brainwave states, your sense of time completely changes. Minutes can feel like hours, or hours can pass in what feels like minutes. And this isn't just subjective distortion. Neuroscience shows that meditation actually affects how your brain processes temporal information. The area of your brain called the posterior parietal cortex, which creates your sense of being a separate self located in space and time. It deactivates during deep meditation. And when this happens, you can experience timelessness, eternity, what mystics call the eternal now, because you're literally unplugging from the brain mechanism that creates linear time perception. And this has profound implications. If time is created by your brain's information processing rather than being an objective feature of reality, then the past and future don't exist in the way we normally think they do. Everything is actually happening now. And deep meditation gives you access to this timeless dimension of consciousness where past, present, and future are all accessible simultaneously. This is how psychics and mystics can perceive information about past lives and future probabilities. They're accessing consciousness beyond the brain's temporal filtering system. And you can develop this ability too through consistent meditation practice. But of course, mainstream science dismisses these experiences as hallucinations or delusions because they can't fit them into the materialistic paradigm that says consciousness is just brain activity. Let's talk about what happens to your consciousness during meditation in terms that ancient traditions understood, but modern science is struggling to explain. The yogis of India mapped out 7 major chakras, energy centers along the spine from the base to the crown, and they taught that meditation activates and balances these chakras, allowing Kundalini energy, the dormant spiritual force coiled at the base of the spine, to rise up through each center, awakening higher and higher levels of consciousness. Now, you might think this is just mystical poetry, but when you look at what modern neuroscience has discovered about the vagus nerve, the longest nerve in your body that runs from your brainstem down through your heart, lungs, and digestive system, it's fascinating how this maps onto the ancient chakra system. The vagus nerve is part of the parasympathetic nervous system, the rest and digest response that activates during meditation, and stimulation of the vagus nerve produces profound effects on consciousness, emotion, and even immune function. When you practice certain meditation techniques, especially breath-focused practices like pranayama, you're directly stimulating the vagus nerve, increasing vagal tone, which correlates with better emotional regulation, increased heart rate variability, enhanced social connection, and even experiences of transcendence and unity consciousness. So the ancient yogis weren't wrong about energy rising through the body during meditation. They were describing a real physiological phenomenon that Western science is only now beginning to measure and understand. But here's the really forbidden part that connects meditation to the nature of reality itself. Quantum physicists have discovered that at the fundamental level, reality isn't made of solid matter. It's made of energy, vibrations, frequencies, consciousness. The double-slit experiment proved that particles behave differently when they're being observed versus when they're not, suggesting that consciousness is fundamental to reality, rather than being an emergent property of matter. When you meditate, especially when you reach advanced states of absorption called samadhi in the yogic tradition or satori in Zen Buddhism, you directly experience this truth. The boundaries between subject and object dissolve. You experience yourself as the field of consciousness in which all phenomena arise. You realize that you're not a separate self having conscious experiences. You are consciousness itself, temporarily identifying with a particular body-mind system. And this realization is liberating in the deepest possible sense because it means you're not limited to the small self, the ego, the personality. You're actually infinite consciousness exploring itself through billions of different perspectives. The Upanishads stated this thousands of years ago. Tattvam asi. Thou art that, you are the ultimate reality. But this knowledge was kept hidden in the inner circles of the mystery schools, because if everyone realized their true nature, the systems of control based on fear, separation, and limitation would lose all power. The Egyptian mystery schools had similar teachings in the Hermetic texts, especially the Kybalion, which teaches that the all is mind, the universe is mental, meaning consciousness is the ground of all being, and physical reality is a mental creation, a thought in the mind of the infinite. And meditation is the practice that allows you to recognize yourself as an aspect of this infinite mind. When you meditate deeply and consistently, you begin to have direct experiences that confirm this. You might experience yourself expanding beyond your body, perceiving yourself as a field of awareness that extends into the room, the building, the city, the planet, the universe. Or you might have experiences of communicating with other consciousnesses, receiving information from what Carl Jung called the collective unconscious, accessing archetypal knowledge that doesn't come from your personal memories or experiences, And neuroscience can measure the brainwave patterns during these experiences. They can see the increased coherence and synchronization, the gamma wave activity, the deactivation of the default mode network. But they can't explain where the information comes from or why these experiences have such profound transformative effects on people's lives. Here's another angle they don't want you connecting. Have you ever wondered why meditation is becoming more popularized in corporate settings, in schools, in wellness apps, but always in a watered-down, secularized, stripped of its spiritual power format? It's not an accident, it's co-optation. The same thing that happened with yoga in the West. What was once a profound spiritual practice for liberation and enlightenment got turned into a fitness trend and a commodity. And the same thing is happening with meditation. You're being sold mindfulness as a productivity tool, a way to become a better worker, a more efficient consumer, a calmer citizen who doesn't question the system. But real meditation, the kind practiced in the ancient traditions, it's revolutionary, it's radical. It's designed to wake you up from the matrix of conditioned thinking, societal programming, and consensus reality. The Buddha himself taught meditation as a path to liberation, to freedom from suffering. And suffering in Buddhist understanding isn't just personal pain. It's the fundamental dissatisfaction that comes from living in illusion, from identifying with a false self, from being trapped in ignorance of your true nature. And when you practice meditation in its fullest depth, you don't become a better cog in the machine. You become free. You see through the illusions. You recognize the game. You reclaim your sovereign consciousness. And that's what they don't want. Let's go deeper into the practical mechanics of what's happening in your brain during different stages of meditation. Because understanding this will help you navigate your own practice and recognize when you're truly going deep versus when you're just relaxing. In the beginning stages, when you first close your eyes and start focusing on your breath or a mantra, your brain is shifting from beta waves, 13 to 30 hertz, the normal waking consciousness state, down into alpha waves, 8 to 13 hertz. This is the relaxed alert state, the brain's idling speed, where creativity begins to flow and stress starts to dissolve. As you settle deeper, maybe after 10 or 20 minutes of sustained practice, you start dropping into theta waves, 48 hertz. This is the twilight state between waking and sleeping, where vivid imagery can appear, where deep memories and subconscious material surfaces, where profound insights and intuitions emerge. And this is also the state where the boundary between conscious and unconscious mind becomes permeable, allowing for deep healing and integration of shadow material, repressed emotions, unprocessed trauma. But if you can maintain awareness while going even deeper, you enter delta waves, 0.5 to 4 hertz. This is the state of deep dreamless sleep for most people. But for advanced meditators, it's the state of conscious awareness without any mental content, pure witnessing consciousness. What the yogis call turiya, the fourth state beyond waking, dreaming, and deep sleep. And in this state, the brain produces the highest levels of growth hormone, melatonin, and endogenous DMT, creating conditions for profound healing, regeneration, and mystical experience. Now here's something absolutely crucial that they don't teach in the mainstream meditation apps. There's a phenomenon called the gap, that split-second transition between thoughts where pure consciousness reveals itself. And the entire practice of meditation can be understood as learning to recognize, stabilize, and extend these gaps. Between every two thoughts, every two breaths, every two moments of perception, there's a gap, a space, a silence. And in that space, you're not identified with the thinking mind. You're not caught in the story of past and future. You're just being pure awareness without content, and this is your true nature, what you've always been beneath all the mental noise and conditioning. The Tibetan Dzogchen tradition teaches recognition of this natural state. They call it Rigpa, pure awareness, and they say that enlightenment isn't something you have to achieve or attain. It's what you already are when you stop identifying with the temporary contents of consciousness and recognize yourself as the awareness in which everything appears. And meditation is simply the practice of becoming familiar with this natural state, resting in the gap more and more until eventually you realize you are the gap. You are the space, the silence, the awareness itself, and everything else is just passing phenomena. But here's where it gets really practical and really powerful. When you understand what's happening in your brain during meditation, you can work with it intentionally. You can guide the process, accelerate your development, and avoid some of the pitfalls and plateaus that many practitioners encounter. For example, if you want to access deeper theta states where healing and insight occur, you need to practice at specific times when your brain naturally produces more theta waves, like early morning right after waking, or late evening before sleep. And you need to create conditions that support theta, like darkness or dim lighting, comfortable temperature, minimal sensory input, because theta is the internal processing state, where your brain is less focused on the external world. If you want to increase gamma wave activity, those peak performance states where the entire brain synchronizes, you need to practice concentration techniques that require sustained focused attention, like following the breath at the nostrils, or visualizing complex sacred geometry, or repeating mantras with precise articulation. Because gamma waves emerge when different brain regions coordinate their activity around a specific task or perception. And here's a secret that the ancient traditions knew but modern neuroscience is just discovering. Different meditation techniques affect different parts of your brain and produce different results. Focused attention meditation, like concentrating on the breath or a candle flame, it strengthens the prefrontal cortex and improves executive function, willpower, and the ability to maintain attention. Whereas open monitoring meditation, where you observe whatever arises without focusing on anything specific, it increases activity in the insular cortex and enhances interoceptive awareness, your ability to sense internal bodily states and emotions. Loving kindness meditation, where you generate feelings of compassion and goodwill. It activates the left prefrontal cortex and increases positive emotions while decreasing activity in the amygdala, reducing fear and defensiveness. And mantra meditation, repeating a sacred sound or phrase. It creates rhythmic patterns in the brain that can induce trance states and facilitate access to altered states of consciousness. The mystery schools understood this, which is why they had different practices for different purposes, different meditations for purification versus insight versus union versus manifestation. But modern secularized mindfulness often teaches one generic technique and expects it to serve all purposes, which is like trying to build a house with only a hammer. Let's talk about something that's absolutely forbidden in mainstream discourse. The connection between meditation and psychic abilities, what the yogis call siddhis, powers that arise naturally as consciousness expands. The Yoga Sutras of Patanjali, one of the foundational texts of meditation practice, devotes an entire chapter to siddhis, describing abilities like telepathy, clairvoyance, precognition, psychokinesis, even levitation and bilocation. And while mainstream science dismisses these as superstition, neuroscience has actually documented some extraordinary capabilities in advanced meditators. Studies have shown that experienced practitioners can voluntarily control, supposedly involuntary bodily functions. They can raise or lower their body temperature at will. They can slow their heart rate to near-death levels. They can reduce their metabolic rate to a fraction of normal. And some advanced practitioners of Tummo meditation can sit outside in freezing temperatures while wet sheets wrapped around their bodies dry from the heat they generate internally. If consciousness can affect these internal bodily processes, which materialistic science said was impossible until they measured it happening, then why couldn't consciousness also affect external reality, other minds, distant events? The truth is, consciousness is non-local. It's not confined to your skull. Quantum entanglement and other phenomena suggest that consciousness can affect things at a distance. And meditation is the training that makes you more conscious of and able to work with these subtle connections. Now I need to tell you about something that happens to many meditators, but nobody talks about because it's too strange, too outside the accepted framework. As you go deeper in your practice, you may start experiencing what appears to be contact with other intelligences, other consciousnesses, beings of light, ancestral spirits, higher dimensional entities, ascended masters, whatever labels different traditions use. And the materialist explanation is that these are just projections of your subconscious, archetypes from your collective unconscious, hallucinations created by your brain. But what if they're not? What if consciousness is a spectrum, and human consciousness is just one narrow band? And meditation tunes your antenna to pick up other frequencies where other forms of consciousness exist. The ancient Egyptians didn't think their gods were metaphors. They considered them real beings inhabiting different dimensions. And they used meditation, sacred rituals, and altered states to communicate with these beings and receive wisdom, healing, and guidance. And shamanic cultures around the world have similar practices and similar experiences. Your brain in deep meditation states is producing DMT, the same molecule that in high doses produces encounters with entities that many people describe as more real than physical reality. And these encounters often impart profound wisdom, life-changing insights, and information that the person couldn't have known through normal means. So while I can't prove to you that these experiences are objective encounters versus subjective hallucinations, I can tell you that the wisdom received is often valid and transformative regardless of its source, and that closing yourself off to these possibilities limits your exploration of consciousness. Here's another piece of the puzzle that connects meditation to the bigger picture of reality. Time researchers have found that during deep meditation, not only does time perception change, but some meditators report experiencing what they call time slips, moments where they seem to perceive past or future events, or parallel timelines, alternative versions of reality. Now, this sounds like science fiction, but if consciousness is fundamental and time is a construct created by the brain's information processing, then it's actually logical that expanded consciousness could perceive beyond the linear time stream. And there's actually some interesting research in quantum physics that supports this, like experiments showing that the present can influence the past through retrocausality, or the many worlds interpretation suggesting that all possible timelines exist simultaneously in the quantum multiverse. When you meditate deeply and your default mode network shuts down, you're unplugging from the brain mechanisms that create your sense of being a localized self moving through linear time. And in that state, your consciousness can potentially access information from other points in the space-time continuum, which is why some advanced meditators seem to have prophetic abilities or knowledge of past lives. They're not necessarily psychic in some supernatural sense. They're just accessing consciousness beyond the normal filtering and limiting functions of the brain. Let me share with you what the Tibetan Book of the Dead, the Bardo Thodol, teaches about meditation and consciousness, because it's directly relevant to understanding what happens in your brain. This ancient text describes the stages of consciousness after death, the bardos, but it's not really about death in the way we usually think about it. It's about the transitions of consciousness that happen every moment, every time you fall asleep, every time you lose yourself in thought, and then wake, back up to awareness. And the text teaches that meditation practice prepares you for these transitions by familiarizing you with the nature of consciousness, the clear light awareness that's always present beneath the fluctuations of the mind. The Tibetans discovered through centuries of introspective meditation that consciousness has different levels or dimensions. The gross level of ordinary waking consciousness, the subtle level of dream consciousness and visualization, and the very subtle level of pure awareness that continues beyond death of the physical body. And different meditation practices are designed to access these different levels. Shamatha meditation for calming the gross level, visualization practices for working with the subtle level, and Dzogchen or Mahamudra for recognizing the very subtle, clear light nature of mind. Modern neuroscience is finding correlates for these levels in different brain states and different degrees of default mode network activity. But the ancient practitioners mapped these territories in far greater detail than our current scientific instruments can measure. Now let's address something really important that might be happening to you if you've been meditating regularly. You might be experiencing what spiritual traditions call purification, or what psychology might call the integration of shadow material, or what neuroscience would describe as the processing and release of stored trauma and emotional conditioning. When you meditate, especially when you reach deeper states, you're not just creating new beneficial patterns in your brain. You're also surfacing old patterns that have been suppressed, repressed, or dissociated. And this can be uncomfortable, even intense. You might experience waves of sadness, anger, fear, or grief that seem to come from nowhere. You might have vivid, disturbing dreams. You might go through periods of increased anxiety or depression. And many people quit meditation at this stage because they think they're doing it wrong or it's making them worse. But actually, this is a sign that it's working. Your nervous system is processing and releasing stored trauma that's been locked in your body and brain. Your consciousness is becoming aware of shadow material that was previously unconscious. And this is necessary for genuine healing and transformation. You have to feel it to heal it. You have to bring it into conscious awareness to integrate it. And meditation creates the safe container and the expanded awareness needed for this deep work to happen. The ancient mystery schools understood this as the initiatory process, the death and rebirth that every initiate must go through. And they created specific practices and rituals to facilitate this transformation. But they also knew it was dangerous to do this work alone without guidance, which is why they had teachers, lineages, and community support structures. And this is one reason why I want to be very clear with you. If you're going deep with meditation, especially if you're exploring altered states or working with trauma, please consider finding a qualified teacher or therapist who understands these territories. Because while meditation is generally safe and beneficial, it can also surface material that's challenging to process alone. And there's no shame in getting support. In fact, it's wisdom. The Tibetan tradition has the concept of the spiritual friend, the Kalyamatada, someone who's walked the path before you and can guide you through the difficult passages. And even the Buddha didn't become enlightened alone. He had teachers. He practiced with other seekers. And after his awakening, he spent 45 years teaching others. So don't buy into the myth of the solo spiritual warrior. We're meant to awaken together, to support each other's unfolding. Here's something fascinating about the neuroplasticity changes from meditation that has huge implications for your life. The strengthening of your prefrontal cortex and the weakening of your amygdala doesn't just make you calmer and more focused, it fundamentally changes your relationship to your own thoughts and emotions. Before meditation practice, most people are completely identified with their thoughts. If they think, "I'm worthless," they believe it. If they feel anxious, they become anxious. There's no space between the stimulus and the response, the thought or feeling and the identification with it. But meditation creates that space, that gap we talked about earlier. And in that space, you realize you're not your thoughts. You're the awareness observing thoughts. You're not your emotions, you're the consciousness in which emotions arise and pass. This is called metacognitive awareness or decentering in psychology, and it's the key to emotional freedom, because once you realize you're not your thoughts and feelings, they lose their power to control you. You can observe anxiety without being anxious. You can notice anger without acting from anger. You can recognize fear without being paralyzed by it. And this is true empowerment, not the fake empowerment sold by self-help gurus, but the genuine liberation that comes from recognizing your nature as awareness itself. Let's go even deeper into what neuroscience has discovered about long-term meditators that absolutely validates what ancient traditions have taught. Researchers studied the brains of monks who had completed the traditional 3-year retreat, spending 3 years in near-constant meditation practice, and they found that these monks had developed what appears to be a permanent trait change, not just state changes during meditation, but lasting alterations in their baseline consciousness. Their brains showed increased gamma wave activity even during rest. Their default mode networks remained partially deactivated even during normal daily activities. And most remarkably, they reported a stable sense of well-being and peace that wasn't dependent on external circumstances. They had essentially rewired their brains for happiness, for presence, for consciousness. And while 3 years of intensive practice might not be realistic for most people, the principle applies at all levels. Every hour you spend in meditation is rewiring your brain, creating new neural pathways, strengthening beneficial patterns, weakening harmful ones, and moving you toward this kind of stable awakened consciousness. Now I want to tell you about something that happens at very advanced levels of meditation that absolutely cannot be explained by materialistic neuroscience. And that's the phenomenon of shared consciousness or group mind. When multiple people meditate together with coherent intention, the ancient traditions knew this, which is why they emphasize Sangha, community practice, group meditation. They knew that practicing together amplifies the effect for everyone involved and creates a morphic field, to use Rupert Sheldrake's term, that makes it easier for others to access these states. And this has profound implications. It means your meditation practice isn't just for you, it's affecting the collective consciousness, raising the vibration of humanity as a whole, contributing to the awakening of our species. Here's the truth that brings all of this together. Your brain is not generating consciousness, it's translating consciousness, it's stepping down the infinite into finite form. And meditation is the practice of reversing that process, of expanding back into the infinite while still maintaining form, of remembering what you are beyond the brain, beyond the body, beyond the personality, beyond time and space. Every neurotransmitter, every brainwave pattern, every structural change in your neural architecture during meditation is facilitating this remembering, this awakening, this return to your true nature as boundless awareness. And yes, neuroscience can measure the physical correlates, the chemicals and the electricity and the structural changes, but it can't measure consciousness itself. It can't measure the quality of the subjective experience. It can't measure the profound sense of coming home to yourself that happens when the veil lifts and you recognize what you've always been. This is why meditation is ultimately a first-person science. You have to do it yourself. You have to verify these truths through your own direct experience. No amount of reading or learning can substitute for the actual practice, for closing your eyes and going within and discovering what's there. So let me give you the practical takeaway from all of this deep knowledge. If you want to access these profound states, if you want to experience the truth of what I'm sharing rather than just understanding it intellectually, you need to establish a consistent meditation practice. And I mean consistent, not just when you feel like it or when you're stressed, but daily, preferably at the same time each day, so your brain learns to anticipate and prepare for the practice. Start with whatever you can maintain. Even 10 minutes a day is infinitely better than 0. And as your practice deepens, naturally extend the time, 20 minutes, 30 minutes, an hour, and experiment with different times of day to find when your consciousness is most receptive. For many people, early morning works best because the mind is clear and the world is quiet. For others, evening or late night when the pineal gland is producing melatonin. And pay attention to what happens in your brain and body during practice. Notice when you drop from beta into alpha. Feel the shift when you enter theta. Recognize the gap between thoughts. Become familiar with the landscape of your own consciousness. And here's something crucial. Don't judge your meditation by whether it feels good or peaceful. Some of the deepest, most transformative practices are uncomfortable, challenging, even painful as old patterns surface and release. The sign of good meditation is not always bliss. Sometimes it's increased awareness of what was previously unconscious. Sometimes it's the courage to face your shadows. Sometimes it's the patience to sit with discomfort without running away. The secret that the mystery schools taught and that modern neuroscience is validating is that meditation is not about escaping reality. It's about becoming more real, more awake, more conscious, more alive, and your brain is the instrument through which this awakening happens. Every meditation session is tuning that instrument, refining it, preparing it to receive and transmit higher frequencies of consciousness that will transform not just your life, but ripple out to affect everyone around you and contribute to the collective awakening of humanity. So now you know the truth they don't want you knowing about meditation. You understand what's exactly happening in your brain when you close your eyes and go within. You have the knowledge that was once hidden in the mystery schools and is now being validated by cutting-edge neuroscience. And the question is, what are you going to do with this knowledge? Are you going to continue living in the limited consciousness that society programs you to accept? Or are you going to claim your birthright as an infinite being temporarily focused in human form? The choice is yours. The power is within you. And your brain is waiting to be activated, to be awakened, to become the multidimensional antenna it was always meant to be. If this video resonated with you, if something in your soul recognized the truth of what I've shared, then drop a comment below. Let me know what time it is where you are and where you're watching from. Share your meditation experiences, and most importantly, commit to your practice, because your awakening matters, not just for you but for all of us. We're in this together, and every person who wakes up makes it easier for the next person to wake up. Until next time, keep meditating, keep questioning, keep expanding, and remember, you are so much more than you've been told you are.